Well, first of all, I'm thrilled to be glad to be back, and I'm so grateful to have an audience in the US, and I'm really appreciate each one of the readers. I'm very grateful for that. But we left Volume 1 on a quite grim note with the death of Astrid Heckne, and that was in the year 1881. This book starts in 1903, and we will meet Kai Sveigård, the tortured preacher of Butangen, who hasn't remarried and is still very much in grief over what happened in 1881. But somehow he has matured and managed to live with the sorrow. He brought with him Astrid Heckne's son, J. Hans. He had him on the lap when he returned to Butangen. And obviously everyone remembers that she carried twins, but the second boy, in the first volume, we heard that he died during birth. But Kai is more and more in doubt if that was really the truth. Hans has grown up not at the main farm, but at a very small farm that is a tenant to Heckne, and which is part of what is called the husmannsvesen, where you had a small farm that where the tenants paid labor to the bigger farm. It was a quite or very common system in rural Norway at the time. And there's quite a lot of tension in the air when the book starts. We learn that there is also a tension between J. Hans and between Kai. And what bothers Kai the most is the question of where the lost Heckne tapestry is. And a lot of readers from the first volume wondered if it was in one of the coffins that were found under the church floor and that were later buried at the cemetery. And Kai asks himself the question: Is it there? And I have to say that no reader will turn down a good grave opening, so I had to throw that in, of course. That's more or less where we are at the beginning of the book. And J. Hans is in the mountains hunting with a very old black powder rifle. And he meets a mysterious hunter from the United Kingdom. And, well, I suppose most of the readers has been through the book and knows very well that who this mysterious person is.
Absolutely. So the tapestry, the weaving, right? The Heckne weave, which, I think it's very interesting too, that in Norwegian, the title for the second volume is actually Heckneveven, so the Heckne weave, but we get the Reindeer Hunters in English. But I think to kick us off today, it sounds like you've been on a little bit of a quest in the last few months or years here about the Heckne weave as well. And what have you discovered along the way? You've had some interesting discoveries, I believe, about the weave and kind of the relationship between fiction and nonfiction.
Yes, absolutely. And it's been very time consuming, I must say. Because you obviously want to limit the research to what is, well, usually I find about 8 or 10 times more research material than I will actually use. But I felt as a local from Gudbrandsdalen, also a responsibility to try to find what is the truth about these old legends. I think I explained the most of the background for the legend of the Sisters Bells last time. But I got more and more curious about who were the Heckne sisters? Did they actually live, and where did they live, if so? And what is this mysterious tapestry that were said to have made? Because the legend it's a very stubborn legend, and it's also unique because it has been retold by many, many sources, but most of them retell the same. And it's also a fact that when some officials during the year 1600 or year 1700 went to the place where they were supposed to live, all of them mentioned them. So it's one of the biggest legends from the area, and it's been retold in much the same fashion, without many variations through very different sources. So that made me really curious about them. So we set off on a quest that many people, also local historians, has done the last 100 years here in Norway. But I was fortunate enough to get help from one of the best experts in textile art, and also a professor in archaeology. How do you say that?
Archaeology.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It won't roll off the tongue.
No, it's a tough one.
Miss Marianne Wedler, who's done a lot of research on the Oseberg tapestries from the Viking ships. And with her help, we managed to get much deeper into the story. And to sum it up, it seems quite probable that a Siamese twin, a pair of Siamese twin, has lived in that period. There is no proof from it in written sources, but merely through statistics and through other birth certificates from and church books from the later years, from around 1670 and year 1700. We believe that there is a chance, a very good chance, that they may have lived. And also, it's possible that if they had that sort of handicap, they would have been weaving, which was quite common from people with a disability at that time. And through our research, we found that there was a family of 4 weavers, mother to daughter, daughter to daughter again, that actually had made copies of what they believed to be the Hekne tapestry. Wow. And we found that through some handwritten material that was, I must say, quite obscure and very hard to understand. But we learned that in 1929, the last of the line made a tapestry that she said was a copy of the Hekne tapestry. Wow. But of course, when I made the phone call to the family, they say that, sorry, it was lost in 1980. And there it stopped.
No.
But a small cliffhanger here. 8 months later, I got a phone call from a younger lady in the family, and she had been looking through some old stuff in another house, and in a baby's stroller packed inside a black plastic bag, she found a very large tapestry that was made, that had the year 1931 marked on it, and that was precisely the year when it was said to be finished. And that was the final proof for how this generation, how these 4 generations of weavers thought it looked like. And I must say, we had a slight hope that it would be a bit more original and a bit more obscure, perhaps in a different tradition than most of the tapestries. But it, and not but, because it's a really great tapestry. It depicts the 3 wise men. It's called Hellig Tre Konger.
Wow. So I think Lars, you shared before the Bokprat a couple of pictures. And I'm wondering if it'd be time right now to walk through some of the pictures that
sure.
about
Yeah, we can. This will fold us back a bit before I show the actual tapestry. I think it's 8 or 9 slides, but no, this is a photo of the place where the Hekne, the small farm, was, and we're absolutely sure that this was the place because it's been marked up on official sources that are very, very well defined. So up above, there's a small black line there, which is the railroad. And when they built the railroad, they moved. Yes, they moved the remains of the house, but there are some logs and stones left. And this place is called Hekne. It's the only place in Norway with that name, and it's exactly at the spot where the legend says that it should be. So we can look. Yes. Now, this was a photo from a small commercial that we made, that the publishers in Norway made. These 2 girls are from, they are, I think they're 15 and 16 years old. And they linked their feet together with a piece of rope, and they made this big apron. And then they had to start to learn how they would walk if they were tied together at the hips. And I must say, looking at them, I saw these girls at the photo shoot when the first volume was out. But to me, it was a much bigger moment than just watching, say, 2 girls starring in a small commercial, because this was the first time that I actually could have an image of the faces. What would it be like for two young girls with their own separate set of dreams, hopes and wishes to be linked together forever like that? And so this moment was actually emotionally very strong for me, and it gave me a lot of inspiration to dig deeper into the legend of who the sisters were. Yeah, we can look at the next. So probably, quite probably as well, this would be how they looked like.
Amazing.
Yes, we can take the next. Now, this is when I mentioned Marianne Wedler's work, and she's been investigating the tapestries from the Viking ships. And this small bit here is what they had left and what they had to work with. But with the use of modern computer aid and digital technology, but also DNA tracing of both the wool fibers, and also the plants that the yarn were dyed with, they were able to reconstruct the colors. So on the next slide here, this is Norwegian tapestry art from year 800, pre-Christian tapestry. And it is quite remarkable. It's very, very well done. And not that I know, but I have from the best sources that it's a wonderful piece of craftsmanship. What's interesting is that they mix animal figures with the human faces, or human bodies and animal faces, and this was done to show the character of a person. You know, if you had a very brave person, you could depict them as a lion or an eagle. Someone stupid would be unfortunate to look like a donkey, perhaps. So through this type of storytelling, they actually had a what's the word? Adjective.
Yeah. Objective. Yep.
A visual adjective is what they. So we can look at the next slide. This is very grim. It shows what is called the tree of the dead. It's a tree with hanged people. They don't have any proper explanation, or there are many theories, but no firm explanation of what it actually is. So the research, at least to my knowledge, but the research continues on that. I think on the next slide, yeah, here is this is a photo of the the fourth generation of weavers. That this is the woman that I knew made the last copy of the Hekna tapestry. And this photo is from 1961. And in the background there is a large tapestry, but we weren't sure if it was this one that she believed to be that she said was the copy of the Hekna tapestry, because we didn't have there's nowhere on this tapestry that has a date. But we believed that we had a great, we believed that it would be something like this. But on the next slide, we will find it, I think. Yeah, because here is this is from the local newspaper, and the title in Norwegian, it says Silje, a woman's name, Lars, and the quest for the lost tapestry. So this is a very small newspaper with a circulation of about 1,000, but she is the sixth generation in the family of weavers, and this is what this family, all the way back to year 1700, believed to be the Hekna tapestry. I think on the next slide we will show it in full. Yeah, here it is. So it's a beautiful piece of art, and each of these weavers made a copy that they called the Hekna tapestry. And interestingly enough, they didn't distinguish between the original and the copy. So very often in their language, they would call this the Hekna tapestry, even if it was a copy, which of course during our research confused us a bit. And on the lettering, I don't know if it's visible for everyone, but yes, exactly where you point there. There are these are ordinary letters, but they look quite. There's something strange about them. And on the other line, there are a number of symbols that we haven't been able to decode properly, and these differed from each copy and each generation. But on the next slide, here suddenly it's readable, because this image is mirrored, and this shows us that the first copy of the tapestry was written in where the lettering was facing the right way. But when you make a tapestry, you make it on the rear side. So actually the letters are mirror image, and this tells us that the ones that made one of these copies were not able to read. They just looked at them as symbols, and they so it's not before it's mirrored that it's possible to read it. But it says "De hellige tre konger" and a number of other letters that we're not quite sure what it means. Yeah. So this, of course, and here this is very interesting, because this is from these are other versions, and the one in the middle shows the same "Hellige tre konger," the three wise men tapestry. And I think the one to the left is the wise and the foolish virgins, which I probably believe that the one on the right is as well. But this is the one on the right.
The one on the right is called the Adoration of the Magi, apparently.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but all three of these are part of Vesterheim's collection, and just really fascinating to see this center one that is so similar.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the tradition was that they would copy tapestries and follow the pattern quite strictly, but it seems that they made some variation to the cross in the center, because a lot of these have a great deal of variation, and they contain a lot of symbols that we are not sure what means. My theory has been that I know that many people here are interested in symbols, and that in Norway we have what is called a bumerke, which is the mark that's put on cattle and on tools, and also on the fence posts outside a farm. and a lot of the farms near the Dovre area, where the sisters were said to live, had bumerker, which looked quite similar to those on this line. It's not been confirmed if that's correct. So it will be a great job for a local historian to look into the old bumerker, because each farm had one of them. Yeah. Okay.
Wow. So what a discovery. So then this your discovery ends right with this tapestry we thought was lost in a baby stroller.
Yeah, we found it, or she found it there and contacted me. And she's done a lot of traveling with it, and it didn't make national headlines here, but it sure made local headlines, because I must say the Hekne tapestry is perhaps one of the most or one of the Norwegian tapestry which there are most questions and legends about. Yeah.
It's fascinating. It's a fascinating blend of the old and the new, right, Lars? To think about the tradition of weaving and tapestries that goes far back. While we're talking about the Hekne, thinking about the 17th century, 16 and 1700s, but then looking at the connection to Viking culture, right, and the 800s, and how that, pardon the pun here, how that has woven throughout Norwegian culture over time, and the power that it still has today, right? And that the kind of the intrigue.
Yeah, and the what's interesting is that they, in the old days, when you had storytellers traveling together with the people of power, kings and noblemen, they would often bring along tapestries that were sort of reminders for their stories. And they would hang tapestries around the hall where they were visiting. And the narrator, the skald, would look at the tapestries and use them as sort of reminders for his or her story. Usually it was a man that retold it. But it was like almost like comic strips that retold big events and helped him to remember, because this was in a period where very, very few could read and write. But the art of storytelling was immensely strong at the time. And I remember a local historian that wrote that the great oral tradition in Norway died around 1820. Obviously, because more people learned to read. And they considered that reading was something that damaged the old tradition of remembering a story and retelling it. So it was absolutely for sure a major part of the culture to remember something and retell it. But they also didn't differ much between what was true and not. And many people has used this as an excuse to say that they were just telling fairy tales, but it's not that simple, because we all remember that when we are retelling something from memory, it's so easy to confuse the key players. I seem to remember that my uncle did this particular thing, but in reality, no, it was my grandfather who did it. So it's so easy to mix up small details. And as a story is retold through 2 or 3 and 4 generations, things seem to blend together quite seamlessly. And I believe that, or I've seen a pattern in old Norwegian storytelling, that certain stories, they are almost like small magnets that they like to attract to each other. And the story of the Hekne sisters and the Sister Bells they contain elements from other parts of the country, also stories that we found, for example, in Ireland. But still, it's when you strip it down to the basics and go through the to the key parts of the story, we will find the probably something very, very close to the truth. And so we have to strip away a lot of things that say the magnet in the story wanted to attach to it.
Oh, yeah. And the power of story, right? The power of narrative to live on. I think one of the things you're talking about here is just the power of narrative to live on between generations, right? And we meet that a little bit in this book.
Oh, yes.
Just by the Hecna sisters story figuring so prominently, but in a little bit in Kai Schweigord trying to figure out what all of that means as well, right? And the transitions that he's seeing that are happening in Butangen as well.
Absolutely. And when I wrote it, I found it very interesting to look at Kai and see how will he open up to the old tradition, and how will he, who's in volume 1 was such a man of progress, who wanted to throw away everything old, and especially the cold stave church. But given the mental scars that he has received, how does he mature, and how does that open up his mind to other ideas, and perhaps also to the things in life that we cannot fully explain? So that has been, I think that was perhaps one of the most satisfying parts of the writing, to follow him, how he opened up more to the supernatural.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see his transition. When you think about how we're exactly like you were saying, where he is at the beginning of the Bell in the Lake. And he is he's so young and has such clear ideas about what is right and wrong, what fits within Christian society, what doesn't fit. And there's this beautiful, I think maybe, thinking one beautiful passage kind of that hit this idea home for me. For Kai was on 199 in the copy that I've got, and the chapter is "I have buried you once already." And if it's okay to read just a smidge, it's him and Kai and Victor talking here a little bit about kind of the transition that's happening in culture. And Victor's asking him some questions about kind of Butangen, the situation in Butangen. And Kai says, now we have a railway, regular post deliveries, more insightful newspapers, a school system, and machines that could eventually eliminate the more grueling elements of farm labor. And with each progressive step, I see the old beliefs disappear. Victor responds, "That's a good thing, surely." And Kai, I always thought so. I wanted to be rid of all the old ways, preferably overnight. But I'm not as bombastic, great word, now. We've lost our sense of wonder. And I don't think I reach into the depths of people in the same way as I did. They're so quick to settle for any explanations they're given. And then it continues on to 200, and Kai keeps talking, but man is not a rational being, and to truly understand a human being, one must seek the irrational explanation.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that.
Yeah. It's such a, I was rereading last night and this morning, and Andrew and I were actually texting back and forth, and Andrew screenshotted that passage and sent it to me, and thinking about this character, but also the relevance of this story and kind of that question of wonderment in our culture today. So any comments you have on Kai and kind of the evolution you see are you happy with his evolution, how he's progressing, or what do you see in his character?
Oh, yes, I think he is, and especially now as I'm working and actually finalizing volume 3, where he is a very old man become. We'll get to it at the end. I think it's a great luxury for a novelist to be able to follow a person throughout his life and see him through the young and immature stages. And in this book, we follow him from his some 40 something and 15 years on. and how it's gradually becoming more and more curious, and also with a much deeper insight in what constitutes belief, and what constitutes faith, because at the end he's faced with a very, very difficult problem, which is a matter of life and death, and he, at that point, he really opens himself up to the unexplainable, and also to the old beliefs in which is not logical or cannot be proven in any scientific way at all. But through him, I find something very, very beautiful, and that is that you cannot have faith if you have something that can be proven in a scientific way. In faith and any sort of it, it's no use to have something that says that 2 + 2 is 4. It's no use in it. In faith, you have to believe that 2 and 2 is 5, 5.5, 3 perhaps, or 1, but never 4. You simply have to believe that something that you cannot prove, because if you can prove it, then you don't need to have faith in it. And I think that's a beautiful paradox that holds true for whatever you might believe in. If you believe in God and another God, if you pray to stones or whatever, but simply that demands so much of you to make that big jump, to believe in something that you cannot prove at all. And at the very end, he really does something quite dramatic when he returns to the old church bell. This is spoiler alert, but when he goes to the church bell and what do you call it in translation? The thing on the inside of church bell, the helgenskurv.
Yeah, I don't know what it is in English. I know what it is in Norwegian, but I don't know. Yeah.
What he does is that he
Norwegian word is used even in the English translation, mostly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and he mixes this into water and gives it to sick persons, because it was a firm belief in Norway that if you couldn't get that part of oxide from the inside of a church bell, it would cure anything. And in the end, he actually does it. And I think he doesn't believe that the material itself will cure anything. It's not that. It's because he believes that with this crazy and act of faith, I connect to something much deeper inside me, something more spiritual on another level that might get in touch with something else that might be able to cure them. So I think that's the okay, I'll jump to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I found the English word holy blight is the way it's
exactly.
Okay. Awesome.
And that's not something I found up. That is part of Norwegian folklore. If you could take the holy blight of the inside of a church bell and eat it, you would be cured of any disease.
Wow. Well, there's a whole line that we could also go down about the conversation about disease, especially in writing about the Spanish flu, in the context of everything else that we've been experiencing. But we've got a few questions that have popped up among participants as well. And I think one of them speaks to what we're talking about a little bit here with Kai and this transition that while Kai is watching Butangen change, the economy is changing, electricity comes, the dairy production comes on a larger scale. And one of the participants is asking the question about just what we started with, about the talking about the husmandsvesen and kind of the transition from the tenant farmers. And well, the question is, are hopefully all tenant farms were not as exploitive as the book projects. But how common was the harsh tenant landowner situation in Norway at this time, as this transition is happening, or previously as well?
It's exactly as I said. If those who remember the first book, the family of Tekne treated their tenants very well, but it was very much up to the farmer who was in charge. And there are plentiful of stories of people who were really badly treated and who were summoned to work at times when they needed to tend their own small farms. But obviously, I think most of the stories of the negative, they are easier to retell, and hence they are easier to remember. So I also try to balance it with the good parts of the system, because if it was carried out well, it was not that bad system. And there are a lot of I met with several old people when I grew up who had been tenants, and one of them had his education paid for by the farmer, so he was able to get a very good living. He started out as a blacksmith, and his brother got also a very, very good education and became a teacher. So it was very much up to the person in charge, and that obviously was also the weakness of the system. But it ended around 1920, well, between 1914 and 1925, most of the system ended, and the small farms were sold to the tenants themselves. I believe the final year is around 1926 when it was ended by law.
It's not that long ago.
No, it's not.
It's not that long ago at all. Wow, that's fascinating. One of the other questions that has popped up has been, and this is tied to kind of the setting, right? Going from 1881 and ending in 1881 in Volume 1 and jumping to 1903. It's a big gap both in global history, right, in world history, but also in Norwegian history. At this point, Norway is in a different position, and we'll talk hopefully a little bit about that coming up. But one question is: did setting the story in the early 20th century free you to any storylines or any narratives that would not be available today or weren't available in The Bell and the Lake? So were there things about being in 1903 that were allowed you to explore differently? So how important was timing to the narrative arc?
Yeah, very, very good question, because when you set a story like this, you have to have a bit of idea, at least, on how to set these things. I can say right away that the whole story is set up to end at the Second World War. And hence I needed to place the three generations more or less according to that. But I found the period around 1903 very interesting, because it was the time of a great technological breakthrough in Norway. And in the book, we especially get in touch with the hydroelectric power supply, which is very on the Norwegian countryside was a thing of massive importance, and there were hundreds of small power stations along nearly any small stream that you could find. Nowadays, we have also a lot, or it's the most important power source for us. But it started with pioneers that built small improvised power stations along small stream. And since Norway is a steep country with a lot of valleys, it lends itself to that sort of power. Another thing that was very crucial was, and we have to go back to Volume 1 for that, that was to place the story in a time where it would be where it was still a few stave church left, but when they were still tearing them down. And around 1880 was the final years before we came to our senses and stopped tearing them down. And also one thing which explains the sad ending of Volume 1 was the development in hospitals where women who gave birth, because I don't know if I tell it right, but the cesarean cut, is that what it's called?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, C-section. Yeah. That
was invented, as mentioned in Volume 1, or not invented, but they finally made it work in 1882 by a German-Norwegian doctor called Max Sanger, who was awarded the Norwegian St. Olav's Medal for his pioneering work. But it was too late to save Astrid Heckne. And I think these small steps in the story where you are on the very edge of a technical breakthrough but doesn't make it, I was on the lookout for those steps to make it work. Yeah. And also the one thing that wasn't planned at all, but I was lucky enough to have it, was or lucky enough to be able to combine it into the book, was the breakout of the Spanish flu after the Second World War. The First World War, sorry. And I wrote the first draft and was very happy with it. And suddenly Corona came. And that changed the whole thing, because it looked like I had made it as a comment to the Corona. So everything in the book about the flu was rewritten, because the first draft was, I think it was exactly the same or equally good, but it wouldn't work at all to an audience that was familiar with a global pandemic like it was. So hence it was completely rewritten when the Corona broke out.
So that's a case of very bad timing. That's like, oh my gosh. So can we add, so you didn't say much didn't change in how the narrative unfolded, or was there impacts to the narrative because you kind of just hit at this moment?
Well, you would all the first draft, pre-Corona draft, had a lot of insight in how you should act to not spread the disease. Do not shake hands. It was more or less the same advice that we gave each other through the Corona. So I would have to replace it with more obscure material, like how the Spanish flu spread, and that one of the things was to through when they were giving it's called the Christian ritual of when you drink from the it's called
from from the common cup.
Yeah. And the common cup, it's described in the book, but the common cup was a communion. Yes, was what could be a source of spreading a flu, because they shared it, and that was the whole point of it. So through I think during the First World War, the church finally gave in and allowed us to drink from one cup and not the same. But it's described in the novel. But going into such things instead of this advice that everyone knew, or that all Corona affected people would know, that was part of the rewriting. Okay, I have to change gear and dig into this instead.
It's fascinating. Wow, that is. I mean, there was, as I, the first time I read the book, it was like, well, this is meeting the reader at such an interesting point in our contemporary history as well, right? And and especially I was connected to the parts where Kai was looking for the elements we did not know about that could cure Hans and Victor, and it brought me back to March and April and May of 2020 when we just didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a time in that part of the book. There was a time where time was suspended in a way. It was a moment when time was suspended, and there were some really interesting overlaps.
Yeah, and it's first and foremost, when you write it, you follow the drama and you follow the characters. How will Hans manage his life? How will Kai handle his grief? How will it evolve? How can they make Butangen to a better place? How will that magnificent woman, Christine Messelt, how will her plans evolve? How will Victor manage to keep or maintain the relationship with his brother, and what happens after the brothers split in their own directions? I just repeat this quickly because I assume that most people has read the novel, so it's not a big point in say rewinding that, I think. But when I write it, that is always the key for me, and how I live with the persons, and more or less I go with them through various historical stages, and I look at, okay, what happened in that year, what happened in the next, and how would that affect them. But it's not a historical novel that goes and visits the big events. I always wanted this to be a story of how the big events affect the lives of ordinary people who's really fighting hard, but in a small scale. I found that to be the drama that I really wanted to follow here. You have great historical novels that meets world leaders and are in the front seat where big events are happening, but here the world and the drums of war are going on the outside. But at one point we are drawn into the First World War through Victor's eyes, but that is also a product of the energy in the first part of the novel that makes him a very, very restless man. And it's also a link to old prophecy. Is that the right word?
Mm-hmm. Yep, prophecy.
In the early stages of the book, which is the legend of the lightning bull and the yellow raven, which have they sound like very old Norwegian legends or they retold in the tradition of legends from the 16th and the 17th century, but I actually made them up in front of my desk.
Oh, that's magical. Well, Lars, one of the people that you mentioned kind of in that is Christina. And can we take a second and go down and talk a little bit about her character, and also her and Hans as kind of these entrepreneurs, both of them in their own way in Butangen, and her kind of power as is she the next generation Astrid, or is she, how do you see her?
No, she's she's quite similar to Astrid in a way, but she is. I think she's if she had grown up at the same time as Astrid, she would have been limited and not been able to break out of the system and make her dreams come true. But her character is interesting because she requires the technological.
Technological. Yep.
Developments to really carry out her dreams, because she has grown up on a very small farm and learned the again a word is diary the right word? Yeah. Which was very, very labor intensive in those days. But her dream is to make farm work much more rational, especially on when it comes to the women's labor. And she's a woman of great force and also great initiative. So I think she's fundamentally different, or her energy is, or it, as I said, it's made possible with the technological development that Hans is also a part of. But he is more a person who he's doing whatever is interesting in the moment. But her plan is much deeper and will also change Butangen profoundly. What she does manage is to set up the first proper dairy farm, and in the third novel, I will give you a little spoiler alert, because it was very true to most or to a great deal of Norwegian rural communities that as soon as you had a dairy farm or a electrical dairy, a lot of great things would happen, because you would need to bring the milk from the farms to the dairy. Then you needed a proper road and you needed a car, the milk lorry. So a very important thing in all Norwegian communities was the lorry that traveled between the farms and fetched the milk. And as soon as you have a car coming along the road, someone would like to have what's called to jump on, and almost like, so it was the first bus. People would sit on the lorry and go through the village. And as soon as you have a road, you need to keep it open in winter. And as soon as you have a regular traffic, people need to follow the clock, because the car goes at specific times. So it changes so much. It really changes so much to the whole society.
It's fundamental, right? Just as what Hans does with the hydroelectric power changes fundamentally how people see. I love the passages in the book where you're describing how they see differently, right? Mm-hmm. And how they see themselves, how they see their homes differently, the kind of the coloring of when the electric lights appear. A couple of those scenes where you describe the building of the electrical lines up the mountains. Mm-hmm. Give me a few heart palpitations thinking about that power. Hans is such an interesting entrepreneur in that way too. I remember the description at the end of volume 1 where you describe him as a baby that he learned how to walk at 6 months. And so that this was just an extension, right, of his kind of energy and his power. Their relationship, though, is really fascinating, and how they he continues to be a little bit more impulsive than she does, Hans and Christina, and how they come to the negotiation points, I think is really interesting, as they're both trying to make their mark in a way on Butangen. Yeah. And
I think their relationship is what we would call a modern relationship, because they have their own separate dreams and their whole separate aspirations. But while in just one generation earlier, there were nothing left else to do than to work together on the farm and work the same way as you had done it earlier, or in 100 years before. But as soon as you have a specialized workforce, and you have something which demands so much of your energy that you cannot multitask, or you have to focus on one thing, then suddenly that is also what tears them apart from each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is the video okay? I see some comments, but is it okay now, or should we do anything?
I think it's coming just fine for most folks. I'm working on one little troubleshooting thing for one participant, but I think we're okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. There's so much there, and how Hans and Christina kind of pushed the envelope for the entire village of Butangen. In the midst, right, of a major change that's happening in Norway at this time, because when we meet in 1903, Norway, as many of us know, was not yet an independent country, and that gets a marker in the book. And so, this is as you said, you wanted to focus these stories, these narratives around how the big events affect the everyday life for people. And so one of the questions that's come up from one of our participants today is about the bunad in connection. And so I don't want to lose that thread. We talked a little bit about this before too. But the question that's posed is that you bring in the history of the bunad and its connection to the different regions of Norway. Was there quite a bit of controversy historically behind wearing bunads and how they represented the different regions of Norway? Because the question asks or states, today it seems everyone is so proud to wear their bunads for special occasions.
Yeah. Well, it was a much bigger shift than I think most people know today. It was a woman called Hulda Garborg who was the mastermind of the bunad. I assume that most of the history is known to most people and how it was developed. But what is retold in the book is how dramatic it was, and the bunad was actually a rebel tool in those years. It was seen. It was not something that it was not a neutral dress at all. It was used by those who wanted to declare the independence, and especially in those who wanted to split with the union with Sweden. And one place in the book, I think it's described as a flag that you can wear. And it was precisely that. There's one scene in the book where there's fury in the church because two women has come in and they're not dressed in black. They're dressed in the bunad. And that causes a lot of stir, and a lot of the older and more conservative men and women, they are really upset with this. But so in those days, and as one who asked if it's a symbol of nationalism, and yes, it was. But the word nationalisme obviously must mean something else for a country in a union that struggles for their own independence than what we link to the word nationalism today. So yes, it was a sign that you wanted to Norway to be an independent country, and it was really, really important because it was a different costume for each region, and they dug very deep in each region's history to find something that would be representative for it. So it was not, as some people believe, made out of quite random styles and say thrown together. They carried out a lot of deep historical work to find something that was true and representative for each region, and they went very deep in the old sources and the old workwear and the costumes before they settled on it. And even today, each 17th of May, it's a great deal of discussion on how to wear a bunad properly, because obviously, as you know, you cannot mix elements freely. You have to. If you have a bunad from Gudbrandsdalen or one from Hardanger, you have you cannot mix the elements. And a word which always comes up at the 17th of May is called the bunad police.
Yeah.
And that's the traditionalists that or comment or point out that bunad is not, you're not wearing that properly, or you have mixed that one of those elements, and that's the bunad police. And I myself, when I used to work at the publisher, I was part of a team that made a big 3-volume copy, an encyclopedia of the Norwegian bunads. And I've never worked with something as difficult as that. But it was great fun.
So you have a ton of bunad knowledge in your head before this even started.
Oh, a little bit, but I had to. You cannot. Obviously, it's fiction, so you cannot just take a bucket of bunad knowledge and pour it out into the story. You will have to find someone who or a person who is. Who will hold that knowledge, and that's one of the more quite interesting person in the book is the fascinating woman Enkefru Stueflåten, who Kai meets, and who is a textile expert and also a tapestry expert. Mm-hmm. And there's a little bit of love interest in their relationship, which will perhaps develop a bit in volume 3 as well. But all his life he is deeply affected with the mental scar of his lost love to Astrid Ekne. I must mention one more thing, which is all readers of the book will have read the first part from 1612, where the Scottish mercenaries travel through Gudbrandsdalen. That is obviously a true story, and it's retold precisely as we believe that it happened, or as historians believe it happened, with a small addition of a meeting between 2 mercenaries and the Hekne sisters. Where there are no legends that link these 2 events together. So that's my own fiction. But there's a very stubborn legend in Gudbrandsdalen that says that our folk costume is a heritage from the Scottish mercenaries, because the pattern in the Gudbrandsdalen bunad it's made in the same way as the Scottish tartan. And the mercenaries in 1612 probably used something similar, as not a kilt, but a earlier version of it. They had what's called a belted plaid, which was a 8-yard roll of klede, textile.
Yeah.
Which they would fold around them and use more or less as a kilt, but they would also sleep in it. A very versatile textile. And we have proof that in 1612 the tartan pattern was very common in those parts of Scotland where the mercenaries came. So it's quite common, or it's quite probable that after the horrific massacre where they killed all the mercenaries, a lot of textiles from Scotland were distributed in the district of Gudbrandsdalen. And there are only 2 bunads in Norway that uses the same weaving pattern as the Scottish tartan, and that is in Gudbrandsdalen and it's in Romsdalen. And it's just these 2 places where the Scottish mercenaries traveled through.
Oh. I have a Gudbrandsdal bunad, so my bunad's from Gudbrandsdalen, so now I have a completely new appreciation.
And many historians say that no, that cannot be true, because they say that these colors in the Gudbrandsdalen bunad, it's red and a deep green, and they say no, that's not true because that's the Stuart tartan in Scotland. But doesn't matter, because in the old days they didn't have the synthetic colors. They had old plant colors, and they probably had very dull colors, gray, brown. And so the colors came to the bunad later, and so we must not look at the colors. We must look at how it's made, and it's a specific way to weave a tartan pattern. It's something with a center line and mirroring outside of that, which I don't know. I rely on the experts.
Yeah.
So it's the way it's made, not the colors, that links us to Scotland.
It's fascinating. And Lars, the way you set it up in volume 2 with that Scottish mercenary, story starting it off, it has such powerful resonance with the way that Germany also figures in, right? Mm-hmm. And Dresden, and also the kind of the globalism that World War I with Victor's story as well. Mm-hmm. And so at every point, there's kind of this as weaving of all of these these movements that say, there's been an image, right, that Norway was just kind of this place, and especially Gudbrandsdal was just this place where people were for hundreds of years without much movement or migration. And it's true to but it was connected. All of these places were connected to the outer world in ways that aren't tangible necessarily in the telegraph going across boundaries, right? But even we see it in the text, most prominently, for example, in the textiles.
Yes, and it's exactly as you say, that even the most remote places were so interested in what happened in the outside world and became connected. And especially textile patterns has always traveled. And so some people say that that for example, a bunad it's a fictionalized copy and a sort of a fantasy costume, because we have reused symbols from other places, but symbols has always traveled. People say that there is one bunad that has very much the same as a French lily, which is a quite common symbol. But the French lily again looks like old Egyptian symbols, which are much, much older. So there's nothing like that any culture has a certain patent on any symbol or any pattern. And we actually have quite firm knowledge of that the crisscross pattern used in Scotland actually may have had its origin in Norway and was taken and adapted in Scotland later on. So all the way, we also have proof that old Spanish patterns and Moorish patterns from Morocco traveled to the Hebridean Islands together with sailors, and obviously people were curious, interested in what these foreigners were wearing, so they adapted it and copied it, and everything developed simultaneously.
Incredible. Globalization is, it's just one more confirmation, right? Globalization is nothing new, right? Like, people have been moving for forever. Yeah. So I can't believe I want to make we have time to talk a little bit about volume 3, if you're willing to give a few more spoiler alerts to that and I see questions popping up in the chat about that as well. So I wanted to, but one question has been asked about the character of Clara Mytting and where she comes from, and if she is legend, fact, or fiction. And the participant writes, "I hope she was not one of your relatives."
Clara originated through my grandmother. There has never been a Clara, but my grandmother, she was born in 1903, and she would always, when we were out driving in a car and we went by a particular church near Lillehammer, the Vingnes Church. she would retell a story from when she was 13 or 14 years old of a New Year's Eve or a sermon, which is a very cold part of the year. In nearly every time it's bitterly cold here on New Year's Eve. And she would retell to me a story about when they were to a sermon there, and the preacher never managed to finish, and it was so cold, and the fireplaces went out because he was preaching such a long time, and people were really shaking and and teeth were rattling because they were so cold, and he just kept on preaching and preaching. And Grandma would retell that story every time we passed that church. So I developed that into a story of Clara who freezes to death during a New Year's Eve sermon. Also, Clara has a number of other qualities as well. She's very, very superstitious, and probably she's not one of the brightest characters in the story. But she has a certain connection and a firm belief to the supernatural. And again, that's some very use in a novel. That's very, very useful. And originally, I thought that okay, she's just the one that kicks off the story, and because if you have a church that is so cold that someone freezes to death, you obviously need a new church. Hence, the old saved church must go. Originally, I just thought that would be the thing. And the reason why she has my own name is that most of the characters and nearly all the farms, they have surnames from Fåvang in Gudbrandsdalen. So it's like a very natural method. But to give a pure local flavor to the story, so all the farm names are real. But I knew that when I came home, people would beat me up if I had put another surname on it. So I just used my own one as an excuse on the strangest one of them all. And that was the original idea. But one of the people who helped me with the book was a preacher here, and he's actually our new bishop in the district now. So and he said that, well, I really grew fond of Clara, and I think I knew she had to die for narrative reasons, but I really felt it was a pity to see her go. And I thought, now what if we allow a ghost in the novel? So and I fondled with that idea, and then I came up with the idea that, okay, what if she's very fond of that children's psalm and wants to hear it again so if she somehow follows on the load of materials to Dresden and she comes along there, what will she do? So she's active now again as a sort of ghost in Dresden, and she actually will do some very beautiful things in volume 3 as well. Oh,
fabulous. Well, now I can't wait cannot wait to see what's going to happen to Clara, because there's so much hope at the end of volume 2. It ends with,
it ends on a very different note, and I think that when I had written volume 1, it really tortured me, because more or less you have control over the story, and but the grim event really it struck me that it was a really awful thing, and I felt the responsibility to dig into my own mind and to dig into the story, to find something that would really do justice to it. That thing comes in volume 3, and it's also a book that talks much more together with book 1. Book 3 and book 1 speaks to each other in a way that book 2 didn't. I can't reveal too much of it, but so it's on the one hand you have the events unfold from 1, 2, and 3, but it's like a ring where number 3 also is very close to number 1. And I think if you look very closely, I think it's also survived translation. When you look very closely on the final line of the book, a young woman is born, and Kai finally goes in and he lifts her and he holds her in her arms, and she's crying, but she becomes calm when she recognizes him. So it's not him recognizing her, it's the small child that is called Astrid Hekne who recognizes the old preacher. So that gives us a hope that some sort of resurrection has happened. And in volume 3 we will meet young Astrid again. She is the main character throughout the book, the girl who is born in the end of the second volume. So we will meet her in 1936 when she is 17 years old, much the same age as the first Astrid, and very curious about the church bell that hangs in the støpul, and the one who carries the responsibility for the old legends and the legacy of the Hekne tapestry and the Hekne weave. But also what happens in the 1930s is that the ideas in Germany are changing. In volume 1, Norway and Germany was the best of friends, and we weren't the best of friends with England because of the colonial times. All that will change, obviously, in the war, where, say, friend becomes foe and vice versa. But something very interesting happened in Germany in the years post World War I, and that was a growing interest in the Old Norse mythology and the old legends from the Germanic legends and the Norwegian legends, which became sort of the foundation of the Nazi movement. The ideology there were obviously falsely rooted with the links to the old Germanic and Norse past. So, but that's a pattern that will develop and become a quite grueling outcome in volume 3. Yeah.
So we're nearing the end of our time, but people are clamoring to know, when will volume 3 be released? Is there a title that's publicly known yet? Is the English translation going to come out at the same time as the Norwegian? People just want to know anything they can about volume 3.
The Norwegian book will, I'm finishing it now. It will be, they will start translation this summer, but it takes quite a long time because it's a big book. It's even bigger than the previous ones. And I believe that we have to wait until next autumn before it's launched, but it will be out this September here in Norway. And I shouldn't say this, but I believe that the title in English will be The Night of the Scourge. The equivalent of Ragnarok.
Yeah.
Don't say it to anyone, but
Secret is safe with us.
Yeah.
It's just between you, me, Maren, and 63 attendees. It's
yeah. No one will know. I shouldn't have said this, but okay. I believe it, but it's up to the publisher. So
yes, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the Norwegian title will be something on that note. So the Norwegian titles are, it's the three symbolic elements. It's the Hekne tapestry, the sister bells, and also the night where everything will end. The day when, or the night when the known world will fall, which is called Skrå på natta in Norwegian.
Yeah. And Kai has foreshadowed that at several points in this book.
Kai has in the tapestry seen how we will die, and he carries that with him throughout the book, and I must say that the end of everything is quite dramatic, but there is certainly some wonderful hope and color and life at the end. I think, and I've had 9 readers on it now from the publisher, because they are putting so much effort into this publication, and I can tell that even the roughest editors cried, all of them, when they read the ending, and not of sorrow but of joy. So I hope the same will happen to all of you. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Carries with them a great deal of hope.
I have one last question for you. You mentioned the cyclical nature of the trilogy, how it will feed back into itself. And I feel like that's a symbol that has come up multiple times throughout, the text inside the bell being variable based on where you start reading it, the snake going around the door. Was it intentional to have the cycle of the trilogy follow those symbols from?
Well, I always wanted it to be conclusive, that it wouldn't open up to say any sequels or prequels. I wanted to be firmly tied together, but it doesn't get real until I made it up, and so it's not something that you can decide in advance. You have to sit with it, and a lot the publishers wanted me to publish earlier, but I just hadn't the final details ready for it. I have it now, and I'm very happy with it. So it was a hope for it, yes, but I didn't know how to pull it off until the very last months now. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Amazing. Wow. Lars, we are getting close to the end, and I just want to reiterate a few comments that have been popping up in the chat. As we kind of wind our time down together today, there's several comments in the chat about the power of your storytelling, and how for what you have provided for so many is a window maybe into heritage, into family, into these periods of time in Norway that have that means so very much to so many people. And so please know, and please, I hope you know that your storytelling has such a profound impact. And we are so thankful to you that you are willing to share your time with us, and to be part of the conversation. And I think everybody will be ready in September of 2024 to buy the English version, and maybe they'll fly to Norway in September 2023 to get the Norwegian version. So we're just, yeah. I
must say, I'm really grateful myself, because one of my absolutely strongest family ties is my family in North America, in Saskatchewan, and it was my grandfather's brother who went there. But to be able to retell a story from my grandfather's years to other people across the ocean, it's just a wonderful opportunity. I think of all readers, I'm most happy to see the Norwegian Americans embracing it. I'm really, really grateful myself. Thank you.